When a homeless man walked into a crowded diner and quietly asked for nothing more than leftovers, the room erupted in laughter. Phones were raised, whispers turned cruel, and his humiliation became a spectacle. But one waitress chose compassion over ridicule, and her response not only silenced the crowd, it revealed he was far more than the man they thought he was. Stay with us, because this story will leave you shaken. And tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed kindness change everything in a moment of cruelty? The storm outside rattled the glass panes of Lakeview Diner, a neighborhood landmark on Clark Street. Snow pushed hard against the neon-lit windows, blurring the view of buses hissing past and tires cracking over ice. Inside, the warmth was heavy with the smell of fried chicken, cornbread, and hot coffee. Families leaned close over their meals, students laughed over fries, and a businessman scrolled through emails as his soup cooled. Then the door opened, and a homeless man stepped inside. The bitter wind followed him in for a moment before the door clicked shut. His coat was ripped at the sleeves, patched where fabric no longer held, and his boots looked ready to collapse with every step. A knit cap was pulled low across his forehead, hiding most of his face, but nothing could hide the slump of his shoulders or the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. He stopped just beyond the doorway. It was as if he didn't dare cross the invisible line between the bitter cold outside and the warmth everyone else was enjoying. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and his eyes scanned the room not with expectation, but with caution, like someone who already knew what answer was coming. The reaction was immediate. A pair of college students in the corner chuckled, one nudging the other while raising a phone to record. "This is about to blow up," one whispered, his grin spreading wide. At another booth, a man in a tailored suit tugged at his sleeve, muttering, "Unbelievable. They just let anyone walk in now." The laughter and chatter dimmed, replaced by an uncomfortable quiet, laced with smirks and side glances. Behind the counter, Patricia Green noticed him and frowned. She had spent years polishing her diner's reputation, and nothing threatened it more than someone who looked like trouble. Her voice cracked across the room. "Sir, don't just stand there. Move to the corner. You're disturbing my customers." The homeless man flinched at her sharpness. His head lowered, and when he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of humiliation. "Please. Do you have any leftovers? Just enough so I won't go to sleep hungry tonight." For a second, there was silence. Then the room erupted. A teenager burst out laughing. Another snorted. "Leftovers? For real?" A group near the back leaned over their table, whispering, "Get this on TikTok. This is perfect." Phones tilted higher, screens glowing, eager to capture the spectacle of a hungry man begging for scraps. And in the middle of it all, Maya Johnson stopped in her tracks. She had been balancing a tray stacked with plates, chicken fried steak, collard, greens, a peach cobbler, but now her attention locked on the man. The laughter faded into the background as she saw what the others refused to. She saw hands that shook not from cold alone, but from hunger. She saw a man trying to make himself small, as though apologizing for even being alive in that room. She saw dignity unraveling under the weight of ridicule. Setting her tray down firmly on the counter, she walked across the floor. Her steps cut through the whispers until the room grew uneasy with her defiance. She stopped beside him and spoke in a voice that was gentle but carried strength. "Come with me," she said. "You don't belong in a corner tonight." Maya guided the homeless man to a booth near the frosted window. Every eye in the diner followed them as if he had no right to sit among paying customers. He lowered himself into the seat slowly, his posture tense, as though ready to be ordered out at any second. In the kitchen, Maya filled a plate herself, piling it with meatloaf, mashed potatoes, collard greens, and cornbread. When she returned, she set the meal before him, along with a steaming mug of coffee. "Here," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the room. "Not scraps. A proper meal. Everyone deserves that." The man hesitated, his hands trembling as he reached for the fork. For a moment, he looked up at her, seeking permission. Maya gave him a small nod, and he took the first bite. Relief softened his face as the warmth of food met an empty stomach. Each chew grounding him back in dignity the room had tried to strip away. The sharp click of heels broke the silence as Patricia Green strode from behind the counter. Her face was set in outrage, her arms crossed tight against her chest. "Maya!" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air. "What do you think you're doing? You can't just hand out full meals like this. Do you even understand the cost? The message this sends?" Maya rose to her full height, standing firmly beside the booth. "This isn't charity," she said calmly. "It's a logged houseplate, prepared fresh like any other. There's nothing wrong with feeding a hungry man." Her tone was respectful but resolute, leaving no room for retreat. Patricia scoffed and looked around the diner for support. "Don't twist this," she said bitterly. "He came in off the street. Our customers don't pay to sit next to that." Some nodded in quiet agreement, while others looked down, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak. The air was thick with unspoken judgment. Turning slowly to face the room, Maya's voice grew stronger. "When everyone watches and no one helps, that isn't order. It's cruelty. We decide what kind of place this is, whether we laugh at hunger or choose to do something about it." Her words hung heavy, echoing against the uneasy silence. The man ate another bite, his shoulders trembling with relief. For the first time that night, no one laughed, no one filmed. The room that had mocked him minutes earlier was now silent, the weight of shame pressing down on every corner of the diner. Patricia's voice carried sharp across the diner, dripping with impatience. "Sir, eat your food and move along. This place isn't a shelter." The homeless man finished the last of his meal with deliberate care, folding the napkin as though it mattered. When he looked up, his eyes met Maya's for a fraction longer than before. There was gratitude there, yes, but also something else, something that carried weight. It wasn't the look of a man used to begging. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice gravelly yet steady. The tone stopped Maya for a moment. It had the calm cadence of someone who was used to being listened to, not ignored. She found herself wondering who exactly was sitting in her booth that night. Patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, no longer mocking, no longer recording. The silence was different now. It carried the uneasy hum of people realizing they might have misjudged the moment, misjudged him. Maya cleared the dishes gently, her movements deliberate. The man's eyes followed her, sharp and thoughtful, as if he were watching more than just a waitress at work. She felt the weight of it, though she didn't yet understand why. Then, with hands that no longer trembled, the man reached into his coat. What he placed on the table silenced even the faint shuffle of forks and cups around the diner. It wasn't a crumpled bill or a loose coin. It was a checkbook, embossed with a golden crest that caught the light beneath the buzzing neon sign. The crest of Whitaker Industries. Maya froze, her eyes fixed on the gleam of the crest. She had seen it before, on billboards along the Kennedy Expressway, on the side of skyscrapers downtown, on the business section of the Tribune. Whitaker Industries, a name that meant money, power, and reach across Chicago. The man lifted his gaze, tugging off the knit cap that had shadowed his face all evening. Beneath the rough beard and weathered lines, there was a clarity in his eyes, steel gray and unflinching. The disguise melted away with that single gesture, and suddenly the pieces fit. Gasps rose around the diner. One student whispered hoarsely, "That's Thomas Whitaker, the billionaire." A spoon clattered onto a plate. Even Patricia, halfway through her ledger notes, went rigid, her pen slipping from her hand. Whitaker leaned back, no longer slumped but composed, every inch the man accustomed to command. "I came here tonight," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "to see if dignity still had a place in this city, to see if kindness could survive when no one was watching." His eyes swept the room, pausing on the faces that had laughed and filmed. Most dropped their gaze, shame burning hot on their cheeks. Then his attention returned to Maya. "You saw a man, not a problem. That matters." He placed the checkbook flat on the table, the golden crest catching the light again. "I will not forget what you did tonight." Maya's breath caught, her heart pounding. She had no words, only the weight of the moment settling over her like a tide she hadn't expected. Whitaker tapped the checkbook once, not as a gesture of money but of intent. "This city feeds millions of plates every night," he said steadily, "and yet too many go hungry. That ends here, starting with this diner." Patricia blinked, struggling to find her voice. "Starting here?" "Yes," Whitaker replied, his tone firm but not harsh. "For every entree served at Lakeview, a second plate will be banked. Not scraps, a fresh house plate, ready and waiting for whoever needs it. And it won't vanish into some ledger no one can see." He gestured toward the wall by the door. "We'll mount a tile board, one plate for every meal matched, and every time your staff rings an order, the count updates in real time. Customers will see it, neighbors will see it, no one will wonder if the promise is being kept." The diner buzzed with disbelief. A truck driver muttered, "That sounds impossible." A student whispered, "That's brilliant." Whitaker leaned forward, his voice quieter but sharper now, cutting through the doubt. "Funding will go into escrow, locked for 3 months at a time, so no storm or scandal can undo it. A nonprofit partner will audit every number, and your staff," he looked toward Maya and then to Patricia, "will be trained not just in service, but in dignity, because how a plate is served matters as much as what's on it." Patricia's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Mr. Whitaker, with all respect, you can't just turn my diner into a—" Whitaker held up a hand. "This is your diner, Miss Green. But it could be more. It could be the first in a chain of places where no one leaves humiliated, where service means more than a bill." And then he looked back at Maya. "It could start here, because one waitress chose to see a man instead of a burden." Maya felt her throat tighten, her hands trembling against the apron. The room had fallen into a stunned hush. What had started as a night of shame was becoming something else entirely, something she had never dared imagine. The announcement did not settle quietly. By the next morning, the Lakeview diner was buzzing with whispers. Some regulars leaned in close, praising the idea, while others muttered that Patricia was throwing away her business. A food blogger posted a shaky video of the night's events, the clip of Maya sliding the plate across the booth, spreading faster than anyone expected. But with attention came attack. A vlogger, notorious for chasing outrage, painted the program as a publicity stunt by a billionaire playing dress-up. His followers flooded the diner's page with one-star reviews, claiming the food was unsanitary and the staff unprofessional. Patricia panicked, fearing the damage would sink them before the project even began. Then came the health inspector, unannounced, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp for failure. The staff held their breath as he moved through the kitchen, testing, measuring, checking corners Patricia had worried about since the last fine years ago. But everything held, every surface gleamed. The inspection was passed, not just adequately, but with a score higher than the diner had ever achieved. Winter brought its own trial. Supply chains froze, staples like flour and beans slipping into shortage. Panic rippled through Patricia's voice as she whispered to Maya, "We'll have to cut corners, or shut down." Yet, through Whitaker's logistics network, shipments rerouted. Trucks rolled in when the shelves were nearly bare. Contracts were signed that guaranteed staples year-round. Still, not everything went smoothly. On the launch night of the house plate system, a technical glitch threw the dining room into chaos. Customers watched the board by the door flash mismatched numbers. Plates didn't line up with orders. Suspicion flared. A man shouted, "See? Told you it was fake." But Whitaker himself stepped onto the floor, lifted one of the tablets, and pointed out the flaw. A double tap on the screen had been counting twice. With a calm explanation, he fixed it on the spot, logging the correction publicly in front of every customer. Transparency silenced the doubt. Through it all, Patricia wrestled with fear. Her ledger trembled in her hands at night, the ghost of that old fine whispering that she would fail again. But when Whitaker asked her to take the lead on operations, she found herself standing straighter, her voice steadier. What once had been shame became resolve. By the end of winter, she was no longer just managing a diner. She was commanding the operations of a movement. Maya, meanwhile, moved quietly through the storm, carrying plates, offering dignity. She wasn't loud on the news feeds or in the meetings, but customers remembered her face, the way she spoke without pity. In her silence, she became the heartbeat of the project, the reason people believed it was real. By spring, the storm of controversy around the Lakeview project had shifted into something steadier. Lines curled around the block on weekends, and though critics still sneered, the tables inside told another story. Families who once hesitated now ate shoulder to shoulder with people who had. No homes, no shame, only plates of hot food and the dignity of being seen. One evening, after the rush had quieted, Whitaker sat in a booth near the window, the same one where Maya had first placed that plate months before. He stared out at Clark Street, where the snow had melted into rain-slick pavement, and sighed as if carrying a weight heavier than the disguise he had shed. His phone buzzed, the screen lighting with a name he had ignored for years. Evan Whitaker. Maya, clearing nearby tables, noticed the way his hand hovered above the phone but never picked it up. "Someone important?" she asked gently. He gave her a small, tired smile. "My son," he admitted. "It's been too long." Maya didn't press, but the silence that followed was heavy. The man who had built empires, who could summon trucks and fix systems with a single call, suddenly looked like someone facing a battle he wasn't sure he could win. Days later, the battle came to him. Evan appeared at the diner unannounced, tall, sharp-suited, and carrying the bitterness of years. He didn't order food. He stood in the doorway, surveying the place with narrowed eyes. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said, his voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. Patricia froze behind the counter. Maya set down her tray. The customers turned, sensing the air shift. Whitaker rose slowly from his booth. "Evan," he said softly, but the word carried decades of distance. "You disappear," Evan said, his jaw tight, "leave us all behind, and then show up here, playing hero? Feeding strangers while your own family starved for answers?" The room went still. For the first time since the project began, Whitaker's confidence faltered. His son's words pierced deeper than any critic, deeper than any inspector or vlogger. Maya stepped closer, not to interfere, but to stand beside him, her presence steady as an anchor. For once, Whitaker's secret life of exile had collided with the world he had built anew, and the truth could no longer stay buried. The diner's walls seemed to tighten around them as father and son stood face to face. Evan's voice was low but laced with years of hurt. "Do you know what it was like watching the empire crumble while you vanished? Reporters camped outside our gates, employees walked out, and all anyone asked was, 'Where is Whitaker?' You left me to hold everything together with nothing but silence." Whitaker's shoulders sagged, but his eyes didn't waver. "I thought stepping away would protect you," he said quietly. "The vultures were circling, the lawsuits, the politics. It would have swallowed you whole. I couldn't let my mistakes drown you." "That's not protection," Evan shot back, his voice breaking. "That's abandonment." The words landed heavy, cutting through the air sharper than Patricia's sharpest reprimand. A few customers lowered their gazes, the intimacy of the pain too raw to witness openly. Maya, standing just behind Whitaker, felt the weight of it too. How? Dignity and shame, fatherhood and failure could coexist in one man. Whitaker finally stepped forward, closing the space between them. "I failed in ways I can't undo, but this," he gestured to the crowded diner, to the faces of strangers, eating with pride instead of shame. "This was my way of starting over, not as a billionaire, not as a name on glass towers, just as a man who still believes he can build something good." Evan's jaw clenched, his fists tight at his sides. For a long moment he said nothing. The tension held, stretching the silence until it felt like the whole diner was holding its breath. Then Maya spoke softly, her words bridging the gulf neither father nor son could yet cross. "Maybe," she said, looking at Evan, "he didn't come here to hide. Maybe he came here to be seen, not as the man everyone tore apart, but as someone who still has more to give." Evan's eyes flicked to her, then back to his father. His face was unreadable, caught between anger and something softer he refused to name. Evan didn't walk away. His eyes lingered on his father, the fury still there, but it no longer stood alone. The silence stretched, filled with the clatter of forks and the murmur of diners pretending not to watch, until finally Evan exhaled. "I don't forgive you," he said, his voice steady but low. "Not yet, but I can't deny what I just saw here. Feeding people with dignity, this isn't the man the world says you are." Whitaker's throat tightened. He gave a single nod, as if accepting the verdict. "Then let me earn it," he said. For the first time that night, Evan's posture softened, just slightly. His gaze shifted to Maya, who stood firm beside them, and to Patricia, who was hovering nearby with cautious hope. The storm outside beat harder against the glass, but inside the diner, something warmer had begun to take root. The first step toward reconciliation had been taken, not through speeches or apologies, but through service, witnessed and undeniable. The weeks that followed changed the Lakeview Diner forever. What began with one plate of food became the seed of something larger. Thomas Whitaker met with Maya late one night. Papers spread across the very booth where he had first sat in disguise. "This isn't charity," he said, sliding blueprints toward her. "It's a program. Every entree sold will fund a matched fresh plate, logged, accounted for, and waiting when someone needs it. Not scraps, not shame, a full table." Maya leaned over the plans, her brow furrowed. She wasn't dazzled by his wealth. She wanted the details. "And who makes sure those plates aren't just a promise on paper?" she asked. "Independent auditors, escrowed funds, a wall in the diner showing every match in real time," Whitaker replied. He looked at her directly, his voice steady. "But it only works if you're at the center. You saw dignity when no one else did. This has to carry your name, not mine." Patricia, once fearful of fines and reputational damage, was drawn into the project too. When the city tried a surprise inspection, it was Maya's training on dignity scripts that carried the staff through. When supply chains froze in the January cold, Whitaker's logistics opened doors, but it was Maya's insistence on sourcing local produce that kept trust with the community. Slowly, the diner shifted. Customers who had once stared in discomfort now brought friends to see the houseplate wall. Families donated tips into a plate-matching jar. And through it all, Maya's presence anchored the vision. Steady, practical, unwilling to let the dream drift into empty branding. Even Whitaker's estranged son, Evan, returned. At first skeptical, he pored over the records, tracing every plate logged, every meal served. It was during one of those late-night audits that he watched Maya, still in her apron, quietly handing a plate to a boy who had come in shivering from the cold. No cameras, no speeches, just service. That was when Evan began to understand what his father was building, and why Maya mattered so deeply to it. The weeks that followed were nothing like the quiet nights Maya had known at the Lakeview Diner. Whitaker Industries announced the Full Table Project, a bold plan that would turn the simple act of feeding one hungry man into a living promise. For every entree sold, a fresh houseplate would be banked and served with dignity. The rollout drew skeptics. A vlogger mocked the idea online. A surprise inspection tried to shudder. The diner and a brutal winter storm nearly broke the food supply chain. But each time, Maya stood at the center of the storm. She calmed nervous staff with her steady voice, negotiated with Whitaker's logistics team to keep the shelves stocked, and trained every server to treat guests, paying or not, as equals. Patricia, once afraid of ruin, learned to trust Maya's leadership, finding herself unexpectedly proud to follow. Whitaker watched quietly as Maya grew from a waitress into something larger, a leader people believed in. His own estranged son, Evan, came to audit the program, expecting a hollow publicity stunt. Instead, he saw a black woman commanding respect in a room where laughter once humiliated the hungry. He saw her build systems with care, shield her younger sister from gossip, and speak of dignity as though it were currency worth more than gold. For the first time in years, Evan glimpsed in his father's world a legacy worth inheriting. 3 months later, the doors of Harbor House Cafe opened on the edge of Lake Michigan. It was warm, bright, and bustling, part restaurant, part community hub. Ownership was written clearly in the charter, 51% Maya Johnson, 29% Patricia Green, and 20% held in the Whitaker Trust, with dividends locked for future rollouts. Above the counter stretched a glowing board that updated in real time. House plates served, 12,437. Unmatched plates, 0. On opening night, Thomas Whitaker stood beside Maya as families streamed in. He reached into his pocket, not for a checkbook this time, but for a small brass watch key. Pressing it into her palm, he whispered, "Time moves forward when we choose compassion. You proved that. This is yours now." Maya closed her fingers around it, her eyes glistening. For years she had been just another waitress fighting to keep her sister safe. Now she was the heart of a movement that would feed strangers with dignity, one plate at a time. The cameras that had once mocked a hungry man now captured a different story, of a billionaire who tested the world and found its hope not in wealth, but in the courage of a young black woman who refused to let kindness be silenced. And as the night settled over Chicago, the board above the counter glowed steady and true. Service and dignity, 1 to 1. No plate left unmatched. And that's the story of how one simple act of kindness in a diner turned into a movement that fed thousands with dignity. What do you think? Can compassion truly change the world? Or do you believe it takes more than a single act to spark real change? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments, because we love hearing from you. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another powerful narrative. And if you're ready for more, check out the next story on our channel. It might just move you even more than this one.